Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan Emmis Pearce. Ukraine War News Update, third part there are for the 22nd of April 2024. We're going to start with a bit of Ramzan Kadyrov, the Chechen warlord who has raised himself to a high level of infamy over the last, I don't know, however many years. He's been involved in the war with his Chechen Kadyrovites being labelled as TikTok warriors and so on and so forth, helping out the Russians still. Kadyrov was diagnosed with pancreas necrosis in 2019. His PR people have launched a federal level campaign to convince everyone that the head of Chechnya is healthy, Russian media. So I reported previously that he was deeply ill. There were some reports that he had died. He buried alive his previous doctor, I do believe, and killed him. I presume for not, if I remember correctly, something along the lines of complete paranoia, and I think possibly blaming him for not making him well enough. Anyway, he got really ill recently and then sort of made this slow recovery. He's certainly been seen to be talking a bit more slowly and not moving as much, although recently we started seeing more imagery of him like doing the old classic things like lifting weights and things to, oh look, well done, you are able to lift a weight. Excellent. Anyway, such a diagnosis, says Anton Gerashchenko, was made to Kadyrov in January 2019, according to Novaya Gazeta Yevropa. At that time, Kadyrov often started taking vacations due to temporary disability and skipping important public events. In September 2023, a predictable crisis of illness happened, and that was the one that I reported to you. There were the theories that he had died. Kadyrov was hospitalized in the Central Clinical Hospital of the Russian Presidential Directorate with acute pulmonary insufficiency, journalists wrote, citing sources in the Central Clinical Hospital and the FSB Directorate in the Chechen Republic. According to Novaya Yevropa, this was preceded by an overdose of dormicum tranquilizer, which the Kadyrov used to deal with severe pain, insomnia, and increased anxiety. A source at the Central Clinical Hospital told Novaya Yevropa that MRI findings on Kadyrov's brain had left his loved ones in a depressed state. The publication's source close to the Chechen strongman and Russian MP Adam Delimkanov said Kadyrov's relatives reacted like this, quote, "The former leader will no longer exist. The new illness will seriously affect him. Even if he recovers now, he will be neither dead nor alive." After that, the Kadyrov's PR team launched a powerful PR campaign at the federal level to shift the focus of public attention away from his health. It involved, quote, top Russian politicians, including Putin, who met with Kadyrov 4 times last year. Federal PR people, in coordination with the presidential administration, advised Kadyrov to publish a video of the beating of Crimean-born Nikita Zhuravel, Novaya Yevropa reported. After that, the presidential administration launched a long-running theme with awarding Kadyrov's son with all sorts of titles and orders as a main defender of Islam in Russia. Now, actually, recently, again, we'd had his daughter who had been appointed to, I forget her position, coming out again and being awarded something or other. He had awarded his sons with a load of things. This is all about messaging that his family are awesome, and no matter what happens, Chechnya is in good hands because look how awesome his family are. And, you know, his son beating up that guy in that famous video that's been touted a number of times. Here we have Kadyrov running, but again, he's running at like 10% speed that we've seen him running previously in his PR video. So yeah, he has been ill. He's been very ill. He's evidently not particularly well, and goodness me, he's put on a bit of weight as well. It is going to be interesting to see where this goes. As it says at the end here, Kadyrov, during Dmitry Medvedev's visit to the Chechen Republic in winter 2024, I presume that's 23 over into 24, journalists' attention was drawn to the unusual shape of his abdomen, and yeah, it's just certainly a lot bigger. Anyway, Kadyrov doesn't seem to be particularly well. Okay, moving on. Duda, the Polish president, has said that Poland is ready to host US nuclear weapons. Quote, Russia is increasingly militarizing the Kaliningrad region. It recently placed its nuclear weapons on the territory of Belarus. If our allies decide to deploy nuclear weapons as part of the joint use of nuclear weapons also on our territory to strengthen the security of NATO's eastern flank, we are ready for it, Andrzej Duda told Fact. According to him, the deployment of US nuclear weapons in Poland has been a topic of negotiations with the United States for some time now. Wowzers. Okay. The mayor of Hamburg has arrived in Kiev this morning. He's set to meet with his counterpart Vitaly Klitschko and Klitschko's brother Volodymyr and representatives of the government. Maybe more support is coming, Tim White asks. Members of the House of Representatives of the US Congress have come to Kiev. So this is great news. Just trying to see if I recognize them. I think, is that not the ambassador, US ambassador? Yeah, I don't know that I recognise any of those offhand. I don't think that's Bill Pesquero. Anyway, I'm sure you guys will let me know who they are. It'd be interesting if they are bipartisan. Latvia's education ministry will decide to gradually phase out Russian as a second foreign language in the country's schools, the media outlet Delphi reported on the 21st. This is a phasing out of Russian influence within the Baltics that we are seeing, and I think it's important for them to try and cut loose their ties with Russia as much as possible. Protests against a controversial draft law on foreign agents continue in Georgia. First, Georgians protested near the parliament and then headed to the Supreme Court building. This is still significant, and with the Georgian elections on the horizon in 6 months' time, you know, I hope that this momentum against Georgia Dream is looking towards Russia and away from the EU and Western democracy. I hope that the population of Georgia can see what's going on and, you know, vote accordingly at the voting booths. Right, John Bolton. I know he's not everyone's cup of tea. When he was made, he's a bit of a war hawk, and when he was made a national security advisor, a lot of people on the left were like, "Oh my goodness, what are you doing, Trump?" But actually, he's gained some stock with regard to being one of the many people in Biden's administration. The latest stats were like 40 out of 44 Trump's administration are not endorsing Trump to be the next president. If 40 out of 44, the people who are working around you in your last presidency are saying you are not fit to be president, you are not fit to be president. That's a really big alarm bell. Bolton is one of them. Anyway, let's listen to him, because this is with regard to Ukraine. If Trump is elected, there will be celebrations in the Kremlin. There's no doubt about it.
Start with Trump saying that Russia can do whatever they want as it relates to NATO countries. It continued with a complete standstill on aid to Ukraine, something they desperately need given the progress Russia's made even over the weekend. It ended, of course, with the death of Alexei Navalny. And you've sat in a lot of these rooms, many of them. I just wanted to ask you sort of, how does he consume what's happening here in the United States? Trump's words, or lack of words, I should say, in some cases?
Well, I think he sees things moving in his direction. And he really outdid himself in terms of disinformation. A couple of days ago, a reporter asked, well, what do you think of Biden versus Trump? And he said, well, Biden's predictable and so on, implying he was endorsing
What did you
Biden.
make of that when you heard that?
It's a clear disinformation effort to
confuse people,
to give Trump the opportunity, which he was foolish enough to take, to say, well, I thought that was actually a compliment to me. I mean, if Trump is elected, there'll be celebrations in the Kremlin. There's no doubt about it, because Putin thinks that he is an easy mark.
And there you go. And that's someone who worked with Trump and who saw Trump's interactions with Putin. Now, this chap is, I think, a disgrace to American politics. This is J.D. Vance, Putin's third favourite US Senator. J.D. Vance couldn't stop Ukraine aid, so now he turns his attention to protecting Putin's money. When will the Republican Party clean the Putinist garbage out of the GOP? This is really worrying.
I have heard people, Steve, in private in the United States Senate say that if the Repo Act passes, it will be used to control Donald Trump and the second administration. These people are telling us what they want to do. They're going to do it.
So just to let you know, the Repo Act is about repossessing or taking the frozen Russian assets and turning them into greater liquidity and giving that to Ukraine to help bolster Ukraine's war efforts, so it's not coming out of the national treasury, out of the US purse, so to speak. So he's saying now that we shouldn't do that. That was one of the biggest wins for Congress in terms of most people supported, no matter whether they're GOP or Democrat, supported the use of frozen Russian assets because it's kind of obvious. Right? If you accept that Russia are pretty much the bad guys, irrespective of Ukraine, just in general, they're not cool. Let's freeze their assets and use that to help an ailing nation that has been invaded, and most people are on board with that. But now JD Vance is coming out against that. And we know at the same time that Russia is really afraid of these frozen assets being used. So the only way I can understand this really is that he is becoming a pawn in this chess game, and he's a pawn that is being used by the Russians.
I've heard people, Steve, in private in the United States Senate say that if the Repo Act passes, it will be used to control Donald Trump and the second administration. These people are telling us what they want to do. They're going to do it unless we stop them. And this legislation, Steve, is the worst part of this whole package. You know how I feel about further funding to Ukraine. I think it's a disaster. You know how I feel about a lot of the craziness coming down the pike in Congress. But this Repo Act is really, really bad news. And we haven't even talked about the way it's going to affect the United States financial system. I have heard.
So he's now saying, he's going against what most people are saying, which is, yeah, this is an obvious thing to do and it's okay. He's now saying it's the worst part of the package. So the worst part of the military aid package is the repo aspect. Wow. Why would you say that? And is it coincidental that this is the one area that the Russians are most worried about themselves? I mean, I just think people like this are the pawns, directly the pawns of the Russian administration, which is an absolute shocker. Now, Margarita Simonyan, who is the one of the prime propagandists in Russia, is now fangirling, fawning over Marjorie Taylor Greene. But that's just the icing on the cake for this weekend, says Winston Smith. Just a reminder to the Congresswoman from Georgia, if a genocidal fascist country approves of you, if you're getting fawned over by Russian propagandists, you're probably doing something profoundly wrong. And I think he's right there. Right, we're going to have a look at a little bit of analysis as to what is going to take place going forward with regard to Mike Johnson and supporting Ukraine aid. We've got two strategists here. The woman on the right is a Republican strategist. Woman on the left is, I think, a Democrat political analyst. But they are both here giving their opinion of what's happened on CNN with regard to what Johnson did and how that plays.
And his prospects, and whether he can hold on to his job, because, Alice, he angered a lot of Republicans by bringing forward particularly this Ukraine bill, which he had opposed for so long. Marjorie Taylor Greene, rather surprisingly yesterday, said she wasn't immediately bringing this motion to vacate forward. She wanted lawmakers to hear from their constituents, but she has called on him to resign. So how much of a threat is what Johnson did in terms of allowing those votes yesterday a threat to his speakership?
Look, her threat is to Congress getting things done. She is such a self-serving member of Congress. This is all about her fundraising, her getting attention. She's causing chaos and confusion. The problem is she doesn't have the army to back her up. And the frustrating part of all of this is she talks about putting forth this motion to vacate. She didn't put forth a plan. She has not put forth an alternative.
Good point.
If she really had the balls to do this, she would have done this before this big vote yesterday and put her money where her mouth is, and she is certainly not doing this. My hat's off to Speaker Johnson. While she's playing Real Housewives of Georgia, throwing up tables, he threw this to prayer. He prayed on this. He put this in God's hands. And thank goodness, in this case, God won here, and he's not putting out a fundraising letter like Marjorie Taylor Greene is.
Do you think that the Democrats, should it come to that they should try to rescue him? I mean, this was a rare and remarkable show of bipartisanship, getting this $95 billion approved for Israel, Ukraine, and the Indo-Pacific.
Democrats will always do what's in the best interest of the country. And Democrats, the majority of Democrats, have always supported money for Ukraine because we know that that's in the best interest of our national security and, frankly, for the survival of democracy worldwide. The sad part of what is happening, and I get that so many people are giving kudos, even Democrats, to Speaker Johnson, But that is how low the bar has become for a Republican Speaker of the House to do his freaking job. This could have been done back in October.
I love that sentiment. I mean, it's just a bare minimum. Like, do what is right for the US internationally in just putting something to the floor to be voted on. It's not even like anything other than allowing democracy to function in your country by allowing your representatives to vote. Here is something you can vote on. By not doing that is anti-democratic. By not allowing lawmakers to vote on it for 7 months, or at least the Senate bill since February, is anti-democratic. And so everyone's shouting about how wonderful Mike Johnson is, but actually all he was doing was a bare minimum, and he did it insanely late, right? So let's get some perspective, she's saying here, and I completely agree with that.
If Mike Johnson had had the wherewithal and the spine to do it, now he's done it 6 months later, while Ukraine has lost so much on the battlefield. But yes, thank goodness we are where we are now. And with the help of Democrats, Speaker Johnson has finally been able to do his job. Democrats will continue to do what's right for the country. And in the future, if this means coming to his saving, if Marjorie Taylor Greene does put this on the floor, we'll see. If that occurs, again, it speaks to just how low the Republican congressional leadership has gone in terms of losing control of their own caucus. And if Democrats do have to come to his aid, I don't think it's going to be for free. I think it's going to be for some kind of power sharing.
We'll just come to that in a second, but I think it's really interesting. So the messaging here is very different. So a Republican here who is a responsible Republican, as in like understands how important Ukraine aid is and said, right, this is great, this happened, well done Mike Johnson for doing this. Mike Johnson's brilliant, well done, you're so courageous. Democrats like, this is obviously the right thing to do. We wanted it for 6 months. Yeah, he did it, but it's a bare minimum, sorted out. And I know I'm pro-Democrat, but I have to agree with the sentiments of the woman on the left. Like, yeah, it's great, but it had to be passed with the help of Democrats. The Democrats are very much for this. 99% Democrats voted for it. 0% Democrats voted against it. 3 didn't vote. You know, this was a bipartisan win, but it was carried by the Democrats. So if you're really pro-Ukrainian, rather than thanking the Speaker, Mike Johnson, for putting it to the floor, that should have been the bare minimum. The actual voting, the heavy lifting of the voting was done by the Democrats.
Or something that, again, will benefit the country, because Democrats are always going to do what's in the best interest of Americans.
I think it's important. Hats off again to Speaker Johnson for showing true leadership in the face of
all about Johnson.
Potential ouster by the vocal minority in the House. I think this is an opportunity for Americans to sit back and say, thank goodness Congress worked in a bipartisan fashion. We sent a strong message to Russia.
That is true. That is true. This is the functioning of Congress. However, it shouldn't have taken 7 months. And that's the bit that she's rather conveniently ignoring.
To China, to Iran, the proxies, and any of these other nations that want to put a threat to democracy. And I think everyone should call their member of Congress that voted for this and tell them thank you.
We only have a couple moments left, but Alice, does that mean that you think there's some fatigue that's setting in the Republican caucus over all of this chaos? Because how Johnson's acting is not so different than what Kevin McCarthy did, and yet he was ousted.
Well, again,
we won't go into the long weeds of that, but I just think it was an interesting difference between those two, even though they both wanted the same thing. Obviously, one's going to be saying how wonderful the Democrats are, and one's going to be saying how wonderful the Republicans are. That's what they're doing. But I think genuinely the Republicans have less to shout about, especially when you listen to the likes of J.D. Vance spouting off complete nonsense. The Atlantic, Anne Applebaum gives her analysis of what's just taken place. And I know you might be going, really, we still going on, the votes happen, but actually you still got a Senate vote, and we still have the repercussions of what will take place as a result of this, and whether it's likely to bring about further Ukraine aid going down the line. Anyway, the GOP's pro-Russia caucus lost. Now Ukraine has to win. Once US money starts flowing again, the dynamics of the war will change, says Anne Applebaum. All very interesting. We're going to dip into it a little bit. Delay has changed American politics too. Only a minority of House Republicans, including Speaker Mike Johnson, joined most Democrats to approve the $60 billion bill in aid yesterday. What is now clearly a pro-Russia Republican caucus has consolidated inside Congress. And that's a worrying thing, is that over 50% of them voted against it. The lesson is clear. Anyone who seeks to manipulate the foreign policy of the United States, whether the Tin Pot autocrat in Hungary or the Communist Party of China, now knows that a carefully designed propaganda campaign, when targeted at the right people, can succeed well beyond what anyone thought was possible. This is the most important part of this article. And it's on point, right? If you're China, say, looking on at what's going on in the world at the moment, and you look at the Ukraine war and how the Ukraine war has played out, what do you learn from it? And there's so many things that you can learn. Yes, the world came to the support of Ukraine when maybe you might have predicted they wouldn't, but they also fractured. And you can look at the success that Russia has had in taking control of part of Congress effectively. And China are looking on saying, wow, look what you can do with some really well-positioned disinformation campaigns. Let's go about doing that for our own benefit, especially when you hear what Adam Kinzinger said about Xi Jinping and his power over Trump in the last presidency. It's incredibly worrying, and China will have a lot of power to throw at this disinformation game. So anyway, I'm going to repeat that actually. The lesson is clear. Anyone who seeks to manipulate the foreign policy of the United States, whether the Tin Pot autocrat in Hungary or the Communist Party of China, now knows that a carefully designed propaganda campaign, when targeted at the right people, can succeed well beyond what anyone thought was possible. From the first days of the 2022 Russia invasion, Putin has been trying to conquer Ukraine through psychological games as well as military force. He needed to persuade Americans, Europeans, and above all Ukrainians that victory was impossible, that the only alternative was surrender, and that the Ukrainian state would disappear in due course. Plenty of Americans and Europeans, though not so many Ukrainians, supported this view. Pro-Russia influencers Tucker Carlson, JD Vance, David Sachs, backed up by an army of pro-Russia trolls on Twitter and other social media platforms, helped feed the narrative of failure and convinced the minority of Congress to block aid for Ukraine. It's instructive to trace the path of a social media post that falsely claimed that Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky owns 2 yachts, how it travelled up the food chain late last year from the keyboard of a propagandist through the echo chamber created by trolls and into the brains of American lawmakers. And this is it's almost like a virus. You see the start of the virus as it evolves and through in time and infects more brains, and it's entirely contagious, and eventually that contagion spreads itself through into the US, into the public, but into lawmakers' minds, such that they are saying what they're saying and they're voting in the way that they are voting. And it's deeply worrying for American democracy going forward. According to Senator Tom Tillis, a Republican from North Carolina, some of his colleagues worried out loud during debates about military aid to Ukraine that, quote, people will buy yachts with this money. That's a claim that the Republican lawmakers were making in meetings where they were discussing whether they should be funding Ukraine, and they were basically using Russian propaganda to argue against doing that. That is how worrying the situations have become, and why I keep talking about how we need to fight against disinformation, and we need to do that in a much more strategic manner, as in EU needs to work out how it battles disinformation, how it censors disinformation in a really robust way. And I mean that like, oh, you're so pro-censorship and all this. No. This is war. Censorship here is like using tanks on a battlefield. It's like you want to destroy the opposition pieces of equipment. You want to stop their missiles. You want to shoot the missiles down in the air. Well, in the information space, their missiles and tanks are the words and the disinformation campaigns and the projects they have. And you want to destroy those. And you want to shoot those missiles down in midair. And that might mean some form of censorship. That is, if you can know for sure that things are coming from Russia and they are nefarious disinformational claims and attempts to unseat democratic ideals and even legislators, then we need to be shooting down that rhetoric. Anyway, as the article continues, they had read the false stories and believed they were true. But with the passage of this aid bill, Russia's demoralization campaign has suffered a severe setback. This is also a setback for the Russian war effort. And not only because the Ukrainians will now have more ammunition, suddenly the Russian military and Russian society are once again faced with the prospect of a very long war. Ukraine, backed by the combined military and economic forces of the US and EU, is a much different opponent than Ukraine isolated and alone. And just at the end of the article, it says, this has also been a good moment for Europeans and Americans to make the sanctions and export control regimes imposed on Russia take them more seriously. If NATO were running a true economic pressure campaign, thousands of people would be involved, with banks of screens at a central command centre and constantly updated intelligence. Instead, the task has been left to a smattering of people across different agencies in different countries who may or may not be aware of what others are doing. And as American aid resumes, the Ukrainians should be actively encouraged to pursue the asymmetric warfare that they do best. The air and naval drone campaign that pushed the Black Sea Fleet away from their coastline, the raids on Russian gas and oil facilities thousands of miles from Ukraine, the recruitment of Russian soldiers in Russia to join pro-Ukrainian Russian units fighting on the border. We need more of this, not less. The Biden administration should also heed Johnson's suggestion that the United States supply more and better long-range weapons so that Ukrainians can hit Russian missile launchers before the missiles reach Ukraine. If the US had done so in the autumn of 2022 when Ukraine was taking back territory, the world might look very different today. This war will be over only when the Russians no longer want to fight, and they will stop fighting when they realise they cannot win. Now it is our turn to convince them, as well as our own pro-Russian caucus, that their invasion will fail. The best way to do that is to believe in ourselves, she says. Okay, now going on to talking about France. This is from French aid to Ukraine, who is quoting Le Parisien, I think, here. A French company is continuing to equip a Russian aircraft with onboard electronics despite the international sanctions imposed on Moscow. The high-tech SME has long generated a large part of its turnover in Russia. In addition to its dignitaries' jets, it would have equipped 2 Ilyushin planes belonging to the FSB, the Secret Service heirs to the sinister KGB. A former executive, alerted by people close to the case and disgusted by these fraudulent arrangements, has been trying to alert the authorities since the war in Ukraine. His calls to the Elysee have been in vain, he claims. Still determined to put an end to this manipulation, he turned to an influential elected official in the industrial military sphere, Senator Cédric Perrin, chairman of the Defence Committee. The parliamentarian, who does not himself have the means to investigate, passed the file on to the specialised services, the intelligence services, the Ministry of the Armed Forces. So one hopes that these kind of loopholes are closed, that people who are breaking these sanctions rules, if they are indeed breaking them, are held to account. Okay. Swedish Foreign Minister says the EU's next Russia sanctions package should target shadow tanker fleet and LNG, so liquefied natural gas imports. The EU's upcoming 14th sanctions package must curb Russia's ability to circumvent oil sanctions through its shadow fleet of tankers, according to Swedish Foreign Minister Tobias Billström. Quote, adopting the 14th sanctions package is one of the most important things, he said when he arrived in Luxembourg for a ministerial EU meeting. Quote, we will see to it that we both include an import ban on liquefied natural gas as well as measures to curb the Russian shadow fleet. This is, of course, one of their main ways of making money. There are a number of nations in Europe that are still importing Russian LNG. It's great to see Moldova cut their ties with Russian gas now. I think they've weaned themselves fully off it. So we need to see that with more established European countries as well. Established as in, larger members of the EU, etc., etc. The Swedish foreign minister said that EU countries, so this is one, sorry, that was the information I gave you. Anyway, it's repeated there. And I want to just go now to something else. So that's all I have for today. It's a relatively short one today. I had a massively long one yesterday. I say relatively short, 28 minutes. No, it's not really. I want to correct. Yesterday I said in talking about Biden versus Trump presidential campaigns, I said that I think Biden will win, all things remaining equal, and if things continue in this trajectory, I don't think Trump will win, with the legal woes, with the lack of campaign financing, and with the economy doing well for Biden, and with Biden getting out on the campaign trail more, and with the GOP shooting themselves in the foot over things like abortion legislation that is turning women to more women to voting for the Democrats. I think all the things are looking like they're getting into place for a Biden win. But I did say that the polls are now showing Biden is ahead, and that was actually incorrect. Though some polls are. What I meant to say, what I should have accurately said, is they are tightening up. So they are definitely tightening up. I'll just try and give you some information on that, because actually some pollsters are saying actually Biden is in lead in meaningful polls. Sean Lindsay called me out on this and said, look, all the polls I've been seeing shows Trump in lead. That's not true either. In fact, they're kind of all over the shop at the moment, but they are definitely, the averages are definitely tightening. Here's Simon Rosenberg, who's admittedly a Democratic strategist.
And then finally on polls, all of you who listen to Hopium know that my basic view is that once the general election began and the Biden campaign turned on, that we would see Biden's numbers come up in polling. And that's exactly what's happened, right? We're 2 to 3 points better than we were 6 weeks ago, 8 weeks ago. I just did an analysis.
This is important.
Last night, that of the last 22 polls taken, national polls taken, Biden leads in 9, Trump leads in 8, and there are 5 that are tied, which means that the overwhelming majority polls taken in the last few weeks have Biden ahead or tied, and Trump not ahead. Trump is not ahead anymore. The race has changed. The election's changing. Elections change all the time, right? This election's changing. It's getting bluer. It's getting better for us. We also now know that in the states, I want to be very clear about this because this comes up all the time. We don't have a lot of polling in the states. That's why I don't write about it very much.
Individual states.
We have dozens and dozens of national polls, and more data is better than less data. And I'm a little bit more on firmer ground, I think, when I talk about national polls. We've had very few state polls.
There are some worrying state polls in certain places.
Institutions like the Wall Street Journal, and there was another one that just came out recently that was a Republican set of polls. And we do know that in recent weeks, we've had polls of Democrats being ahead in Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. Last week, we had 2 really remarkable polls in North Carolina showing the race being essentially tied between Biden and Trump. And the Quinnipiac poll in North Carolina had Josh Stein beating Mark Robinson by 8 points. If we beat Mark Robinson by 8 points in North Carolina, we're going to win North Carolina. Biden's going to win North Carolina. So we also had very encouraging polling in North Carolina. We all know that our instinct is that Arizona, where Ruben Gallego was already beating Kari Lake in public polling, probably got a lot better for us in recent days. And so, when I look at the battleground states, I'm okay. I mean, things are going to continue to improve for us there. The idea that we're winning the popular vote but not winning in the battleground, that's not true. I mean, the data doesn't say that. The Wall Street Journal poll, which was paid for by Rupert Murdoch, and whose pollster was Trump's own pollster who works on the campaign, which I'm sorry, I'm not going to put any stock into a poll that's done by Rupert Murdoch and the Trump campaign pollster, is that there just isn't conclusive data. Also, another measure we have of evaluating the health of the two parties, which is called the congressional generic, which is, are you voting Democrat, Republican for Congress, has 2/3 of the recent congressional generics have been plus Democrat. Democrats have been ahead in the congressional generic. So I feel really good about where we are in the election. And Ben Misalis from Midas Touch just texted me, actually, as we were starting the show, that a new echelon poll.
This is an important poll.
Based poll. Trump had 4 points a month ago. Had Trump had 2 points 2 weeks ago, has Biden up 3 points today. This is a Republican poll.
Wow.
Showing, like I showed in my own post the other night, there have been polls now. The New York Times poll just moved 4 points in our direction. There have been a series of polls that are moving 2, 4, 6 points in our direction. We now have Echelon, which is seen as a credible Republican pollster, not a wild Republican pollster, who've seen the race shift from being +4 Trump to +3 Biden in the last few weeks. There's no question the election is getting bluer and that we're in a far stronger position.
So that's basically all I'm saying, is that there's this move forward, and continuing that trajectory, I see that as being the end result. So, Biden steps up mocking of Trump as poll shows 2024 neck and neck. So that's the Hill saying that their average of poll has them tied. Actually, it's Trump ahead by 0.9%, I believe, but basically broadly 45% each. So that is a tied average of polls. Indeed, there it is. So that is from the Hill. We then have an NBC poll that has seen a tightening up here. So 46 to 44, as opposed to 47 to 42. So again, really tightening up in the NBC one. And then if you include third-party candidates, this is an interesting one. It has Biden ahead of Trump. If you include like RFK on there as well, Junior. So interesting polls all over the shop. Now, just take it all with a pinch of salt. But my main point was, I might have been overstepping in my yesterday when I said it, but actually when you look at the trajectory of the polling, I that's why I believe what I believe. And this is at the very beginning of the campaign cycle, where Trump is in a very difficult position PR-wise, with a lot of legal issues, and Biden is just about starting up his campaign now, and already we've seen a massive move in the polls. So I don't know. Let me know what you guys think. I'm trying not to be like overly pro-democratic here, but like I'm just trying to read the tea leaves, because I think it's important that you get a trifecta. I actually think it's important to get a Democrat trifecta in order to get Ukraine funding secured going forward. And I think that's a point here, is that what's the scenario that's most likely going to lead to the US supporting Ukraine in an ongoing basis. So you don't have wingnuts like JD Vance spouting off his nonsense and that having purchase, and you don't have people like him or his party, or people like him in his party swaying his party towards pro-Russian positioning. Anyway, thanks for watching. Take care. Speak soon.